All right, it's good to be here this morning with you, and hopefully, Lord willing, we will perhaps learn some things together. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to teach this morning, but Joe, I thought maybe someone else might show up and run me out of the, which would be fine with me. That's, I know there are people here that can teach a lot better than I can. But at any rate, I'm glad to be with you. I was going to start on a series, about a 3-part series of lessons, but like I said, I wasn't sure how long I was supposed to teach. And so we're going to look at, I've entitled the subject, Works of Faith versus Works of Merit. It is a very important thing that we need to understand because there is so much confusion, especially in the denominational world, about differentiating between the two. I'd already decided to teach on this class, but actually what I saw Friday solidified it. I happened to be looking at YouTube and came across a story or presentation. A group of denominational, using the term denominationally, group of pastors. They were discussing things, and the specific subject they were on was one of them had interviewed the Duck Dynasty Roberts people. And of course, they were amazed, that the Roberts were pointing out that we receive salvation through baptism. And of course, when he said that, they all began mocking, laughing, saying stuff about it and so forth. And then, I turned it off after the one, John MacArthur. He is the pastor of the Grace Community Church in San Fernando Valley. I can't remember if it's Ponca City, or not Ponca, Reseda or somewhere. We used to live not very far from there, but he actually made the statement, he says, that teaching is dangerous. I thought, okay, I don't need to watch that anymore. That doctrine is dangerous. And of course, the thing they had discussed was that we don't consider, obviously, we're saved through grace. No doubt about that. But it doesn't mean we don't have to do or should not do anything. And most of the denominational world sees, for instance, baptism as a work. And you can't work your way to heaven, so what? Baptism is not essential. It's only an outward show of an inward faith, I think is how they put it. And so, I've never known any preacher or teacher in the church that advertised or taught that baptism is a work, but it is actually an act of faith. We say that it's a work that earns your way into heaven. No, I've never heard that. Have you? I've never heard it. Well, that's a good question. Yeah. Well, they believe it's because that, it's an act. It is a work, whatever. It requires action. And so, like I say, after that, I just turned it off. But the reason I'm up here is because I want to share with you these things, not to entertain you, not to you so you can leave here and say, well, that was a good lesson or good sermon or whatever, and then go off and forget it. We all have denominational friends that believe what they believe. Can we share with them the difference between what is a work of faith or a work of merit? Can we explain to them? Did I lose you? All right. My neck's going to get sore trying to... So anyway, I focus on these folks. So if I'm not looking over there, don't think I'm leaving you out. So anyway, that's what I want to do this morning is focus upon what is a work of faith and what is a work of merit. Now, merit means what? Yeah, you receive some sort of compensation for what you do. And of course, obviously, when we have jobs and things like that, at the end of what? However often you get paid once every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever, you expect what? Merit. You expect reward. You expect payment. If you don't get paid, what? Yeah, you leave. Yeah, you can leave. Anyway, bring it to someone's attention. And so that is actually something that you say, what? I've earned that paycheck. So as a result of that, I should get paid. There are also people who, and one of the things that kind of scares me about the generations that we have now is that quite often they have been indoctrinated with the idea that they should be rewarded for whatever they do. In fact, I heard one individual that was interviewed that said, we should not have to work but still be paid. Yeah. There you go. Participation trophies, those sort of things. I guess you could say in a sense I've got that job right now. Being retired, I'm getting paid, but I don't necessarily have to work. Right. Yeah, I've already paid. And like I say, I've sent a resume out to my family, letting them know that I would love to continue doing the same job, but I still want double pay. I like get a pay raise in there. They just laughed. Well, anyway, didn't take me serious. I don't know why. But at any rate, merit. The Webster's New World Dictionary defines it like this. Merit comes from the Latin word, and I probably will pronounce this wrong, but anyway, meriri, M-E-R-E-R-I, I-O, no, I'm just kidding, which means earn, and is defined as, number one, worth value, excellence. Number two, something deserving reward or praise, etc. Or number three, the plural is actual qualities or facts, good or bad, to deserve. So in other words, you would put this in the denominational sense. They say that when we are baptized, we then say, now I what? Deserve salvation. Now, believe it or not, that idea is also somewhat in the church. Sometimes, I've heard it many times at funerals, the only thing pointed out about an individual, and sometimes their behavior has not been very good. The thing that was pointed out, they have been baptized. Okay. Right. Exactly. Without faith, there is no salvation. In other words,
the reason you're getting baptized is you believe.
Sure.
You have faith. That's save you the way you sin.
Right. Right.
All of faith.
It's a foundation. It's the beginning of a great faith, in which that we walk in faith, not by sight, and continue in faith. I think week before last, we discussed a lot of that concerning the ability to fall away. Galatians chapter 5, and I believe verse 14, talks about how that the Galatians had fallen from grace. If you fall from something, that means what? You must have been there. They must have been under grace. So, at any rate, we've got to be careful, and the idea that just because you've been baptized almost falls in line with some people. Okay, once I've been baptized and now my sins are washed away, once saved, always saved. I had a Baptist friend that we like to joke back and forth, using religious jokes and so forth, and along the same line about salvation by grace and so forth. He tells a story about a man who walked around and he was always clean shaven. And one of his friends noticed, I said, how is it you always are just, no whiskers, no, I want to be able to not have to shave anymore. He says, well, I don't. I don't shave anymore. Okay, we're done. No, but I know you didn't hear her, so that's a good thing about not having Mike around, I guess. But at any rate, he says, okay, what you do is you go down to this barbershop on the corner and you ask for grace. Ask for grace. You already know the punchline, don't you? He says, because once saved by grace, once shaved by grace, you're always shaved. Well, I kind of gave that away. So at any rate, like I say, we kind of fall along that line just a little bit sometimes when we overemphasize, the salvation which comes through baptism. But I don't want to focus too much on baptism as much as I want to look at what is a work of faith and what is a work of merit. Let's go to Romans chapter 4 to begin with. One of the things we see, of course, throughout, especially the Old Testament, and we get into the New Testament, and much of the teachings of the Hebrews, the Jews, and the religious hierarchy and order, is that the old law was heavy on works. When you go back and study, the law and so forth, you see how that, of course, they had a number of things to perform. And of course, if they performed those, such as sacrifices, the offerings, and all the various things, they were, as they considered, in good graces with God. We'll look at another story in just a few moments. But so, in a sense, they're kind of coming out of that when the church began, but yet also making the transition to faith and what faith really is. The thing is, we find that faith has always been. And that's what he points out here in chapter 4. The writer of Romans says, what then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the faith, or according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. Okay, one of the problems we have about works of merit is that in our thinking, a lot of times we have a tendency to say, okay, as long as I've been a good person, as long as I do enough deeds to overcome my bad deeds, what? Well, some people say, okay, that means I'm good to go to heaven. But even as Christians, sometimes we have a tendency to think, oh man, I've become a bad person. I need to do a lot of good deeds. I jokingly talk about, how that I need to do at least one good deed every day, to keep in graces with God. But of course, it's just something good to do. But here, that's what he's talking about. It says, for if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. In other words, Abraham did what God told him to do. But it wasn't the works that God congratulated Abraham on, other than except for one thing: obedience, which is a work of faith. For what does the scripture say, verse 3? And Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now, denominational interpretation of this would mean, okay, he believed God and he sat around and did absolutely nothing. We have time, we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11. It talks about what Abraham did by faith, the things he did. One of Natalie's co-workers gave her a book about this very subject, and it emphasized over and over and over, I got tired of it, you do not have to do anything to be saved. Well, at any rate, that contradicts what Abraham was written about here. For what does the scripture say? And Abraham believed God, it was reckoned to him in righteousness. Now, to the one who works, his wage is not reckoned as a favor, but as what is due. That is what? Meritorious work. That's defined right there. That's meritorious work. When you work, especially at a job or whatever, you expect to get something for it. Story told of a little boy that was talking to his dad or his parents about getting a allowance, and he started complaining. He says, "I need a raise. I need more allowance." And the dad kind of speaks up and says, "Son, when I was your age, I was good for nothing." Well, that's kind of the works of faith, but we'll get to that. Now, to one who works his way, verse 4 again, his wage is not reckoned as favor, but as what is due. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is reckoned as righteousness. Just as David also speaks of the blessing upon the man to whom God reckons righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds have been forgiven, and whose sins have been covered. Blessed is a man whose sin the Lord will not take into account. Then he goes on, of course, discusses how that this has to do with circumcision and so forth. Pretty much we see here, of course, the difference between works of faith and works of merit. Verse 9 says, "Is this blessing then upon the circumcised or upon the uncircumcised also? For we say faith was reckoned to Abraham as righteousness." One of the things that was pointed out, one of the deeds, of course, that Abraham did that was reckoned to him as righteousness, what would it be? What was it? Yeah, sacrifice of Isaac, his son. Now, if he would have done that, could Abraham have turned around and said, "Okay, Lord, I did what you told me to. I sacrificed my son. You owe me"? Okay. Yeah. God would have told him the same thing he told Job. Let's turn to, well, let me read one more verse. "How then was it reckoned while he was circumcised or uncircumcised?" Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. The idea was that, if the Jews believed that if you were circumcised, which was the sign, the covenant sign with Abraham, that if you were circumcised, that you basically could not fall, well, as like I said, the denominational world, cannot fall from grace. You cannot fall from God's favor. And if you could trace your lineage back to Abraham, you cannot fall from God's favor. The thing is that the righteousness that was given to Abraham or accredited to Abraham was given when? Before circumcision. So circumcision could not have been what put him in his right relationship with God. Everybody following? Any questions? I don't want to go too fast, too far. Questions? Comments? Yeah. Probably, they say that during the feast that the population would actually swell to like 1 or 2 million. Oh, in Rome, I'm sorry. Well, there were many. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah, there was actually a large enough population that they had influence. You can actually, you go to the end of the book where that he gives his greeting salutations to all the different people. And it's from all different backgrounds, not just, and of course, the whole book has to do with both Roman and Gentile. The first chapter has to do with, those who worship what? Idols and, animals and birds and all kinds of things, and of course replace God with those things. But at any rate, I don't know what kind of population there were. I would say probably fairly sizable, because I think there was a fair amount of influence that they had. Pretty much anywhere the Jews went, that if there was a very large group, that they had influence enough that it made the Gentiles, shall we say, mad at them a lot of times. So at any rate, okay. Anybody else? We were kind of discussing that. I was discussing that with my son Andrew yesterday. We were talking about where the synagogues came from and so forth, and because he's at North Mac, they have a very nice large library, and we were looking at some of the books, and of course we were discussing how that synagogues actually came from the period of captivity with the Babylonians. And of course, the Babylonians were the ones that took the southern kingdom, Judah and Benjamin, into captivity. That was the final captivity, and that's when usually it's believed that the synagogues began. One of the requirements for a synagogue to be established was there had to be 10 Jewish men. There had to be at least 10 Jewish men before they could establish a synagogue. So, all right. I won't charge any extra for that. So anyway, verse 11 says, and he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all who believe without being circumcised, that righteousness might be reckoned to them. And the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also follow in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had while uncircumcised. All right, we'll stop there. I want to turn to Luke chapter 18. An example that we have of the idea of meritorious works, like I say, was quite prevalent among the Jews. And here we have an example. You remember the story of the Pharisee and the publican. This is in Luke chapter 18, beginning at verse 9. It says, and he also told this parable to certain ones who trusted in themselves that they were righteous. Number one, he's already got problems because what? They were trusting in themselves. What does that mean? I, number one, am the center of this. I have done what I need to do. And viewed others with contempt. We don't have people to do that, do we? In my preaching career, I've come across a number of brethren, and it can be a problem, that if you're not as righteous as I am, you got problems. I know when I was preaching in one place, they expected me to be as busy as they are. In fact, they literally wanted me to have a schedule, scheduling out every half hour of my day. For a young preacher, that's pretty destructive. So anyway, we have here 2 men went up, verse 10, into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax gatherer. The Pharisee stood and was praying to himself, God, I thank thee that I'm not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax gatherer. How were tax gatherers looked at in this time? Any different than today? Yeah. I used to hear that I've got some relatives down in the southeastern part of the state that you had to know somebody that they know in order to go see them. If you didn't, you would be shot as a revenuer. So at any rate, it can be dangerous. Things have not changed a whole lot. So anyway, verse 11 again, since the Pharisee stood and was praying thus to himself, God, I thank thee that I am not like other people, swindlers, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax gatherer. Is our religion a list of thou shalt nots? Is that all it's all about? No, certainly not. And that's what he's pointing out here. I didn't do this or didn't, I'm not like other people. I'm not. But then he does point out, verse 12, I fast twice a week. I pay tithes of all that I get. Verse 12 is, okay, here's what I am doing. I'm not like these other people. And we have a tendency to say, okay, again, the little boy was asking his teacher one time, he came to school and he had a project he was supposed to do over the weekend, but he didn't get it done. And so he asked the teacher, says, teacher, would I get in trouble for something I didn't do? Well, sometimes that's the way we are. It's a matter of, okay, I'm not like these other people, okay, but what have you done? So the Pharisee is pointing out, he says, I fast twice a week, I pay tithes of all that I get. In other words, he's pointing out, he says, I've gone way beyond what is required. So in that case, God, what? I've earned my way, you owe me. These are my meritorious credits. The text together, verse 13, standing some distance away, was even unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, but was beating his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. Not a sinner. The sinner. What does that tell you? Okay. Some translations may say that. The thing is, he is seeing himself as, well, Paul described himself as the chief of sinners for the things that he did, persecuting the church and so forth. Yeah, owning up to his responsibilities. And what does it take for us to make changes, to make adjustments and so forth? We have to acknowledge what? Where we are at. Realize that we need to make change. We need to make a difference. We're not where we should be. And I think that's one of the things that Jesus was doing with Peter when he confronted Peter. Peter, do you love me? How did Peter respond? Well, we can go into the agape versus phileo and so forth, but basically Peter says, I like you. That would be how you could basically translate what Peter says. I like you. Second time, he asks him the same question. Peter what? Responds what? Yeah, you're my best friend. That's what phileo basically means. The third time when Jesus asks him, he says, Lord, you know that I phileo. I like you. You're my best friend and so forth. Why would Jesus ask him 3 times? Well, some people say it was because, of course, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So it gives him an opportunity to straighten things out. Yeah.
That was part of their, 3 times.
Right. Right. Yeah. If something happens 3 times, yeah. And so that was part of the culture, as you were saying, that the number 3 had one of those was one of those important numbers. But I also believe that Jesus is pointing out to Peter, making him recognize what? Where he is at. Peter, you said you would lay down your life for me, but what did you do? You denied me. So do you really love me, Peter? Peter has to be honest with himself and say, I'm not there yet. And then Jesus turns around and tells him what? Basically, someday you will. Because you will be taken where you don't want to go. Your hands will be lifted up. In other words, and it says designating what kind of death he would die. Tradition has it that Peter went to Rome. And they were going to crucify him. He says, no. He says, and he requested, and then, like I said, this tradition, that he was not worthy to be crucified as Jesus was, and so he requested to be crucified upside down. So we have that kind of love. We have that kind of a situation where this tax gatherer back in Luke chapter 18 is pointing out, hey, meritoriously you owe me, Lord. I've done more than was required. How often were they required actually to fast under Judaism? I don't have the scripture, but basically once a year, feast time. So verse 14 says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified. Which man? The tax gatherer, the one who basically was hated. Rather than the other, for everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, but he who humbles himself shall be exalted. When it comes to faith, are we to in any way exalt ourselves? No. Do we deserve to be exalted? No. I'm glad to say that that's one of the big differences I see in the church versus denominational TV programs. Because basically most of the denominational, not almost all of them, the denominational TV programs, what's the title of it? The Ministries of so-and-so. Whose ministry is it? It's like I have pointed out, I think some time ago, that when Tammy Faye and what's his name? Pardon? Yeah, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. When they first started in the PTL club, it was a PTL club with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. It wasn't long before, guess what? It's Jim and Tammy Faye Baker in the PTL club. Well, we know what's happened to them. But that's one of the great differences behind, those who want to glorify God or themselves. Is that somehow their name has got to be in there. So-and-so's ministry, so-and-so, this person, that person, whatever. Lifting themselves up. It requires humility, as Jesus points out. Everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, but he who humbles himself shall be exalted. So here we have actually the contrast between, you could say, the old and new covenant. The Pharisee was an example of the old covenant with lots of pride, where that the tax gatherer might be an example of what? The faith in the new covenant. Okay, we've seen Romans chapter 4, of course, how that there is a differentiation between works of faith versus works of merit. In James chapter 2, obviously, and you have, I know, studied this many times, but in James chapter 2, he points out that if we have faith, or we say we have faith, what? What must accompany it? Action. Action. I've said it over and over again, and you may get tired of me saying it, but a profession of faith or belief in God requires action. That's all there is to it. Jesus points out in Luke chapter 6 and verse 46, put your finger here in James, that of course he says, and why do you call me Lord, Lord, and what? Do not do what I say. Works of faith are acts of obedience, not because we expect meritorious reward, but simply doing what God tells us. Going back to James, of course, verse 14, what use is it, my brother, if a man says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? If your brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Oh, listen, friend, I am praying for you. Is that all we need to do? If you have what they need, what are you supposed to do with it? Share it. And sometimes you'll hear stories about someone that saw someone in need and they literally went out and bought whatever they needed for them. Verse 17, even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. Someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Does coming to this building and sitting in a pew make you a Christian? Why not? Okay. Yeah, you bring your cat or your dog. I've heard over and over again, if you go sit in a chicken coop, does that make you a chicken? Now, if you lay an egg, it might be a possibility. But the thing is, how do we show that we are Christians? How do we show our faith? Our works. What is it that motivates us to have works of faith? You just said it. We're motivated to do so. What motivates us? The love of Christ, Tom? Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. To define the word faith, it requires, that the word action be in there. Act out, show, live what you mean. One of the things that bothers me is when, and we all have this, people that claim to be Christians, but what do their actions say? Well, that's actually what we look at back in Romans chapter 2, where the circumcised, of course, bragged about their circumcision, but their behavior was worse than the Gentiles. Yeah. So anyway, verse 24, you see that a man is justified by works and not by faith alone. There is as Tom says, you've got to have the two combined. Hebrews chapter 11, the great chapter, Hall of Faith, is all about what? Yeah, get my. Anybody need $1 million bill? I've got $1 million bill. You're welcome to. I'll let you look at it, but you got to give it back. I might need it someday. Here. He says, "Is that real?" No, it is a promotional type deal. I mean, you don't see the watermark on it and all that stuff? All right. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. It says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. This is the New American Standard reading. For by it the men of old gained approval. Okay. Not only the men of old, but anyone who acts on faith. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen is not made out of things which are visible. Basically, what this is saying, of course, faith, I've had it put this way. Faith is being able to see the invisible, believe the incredible, receive the impossible. That's basically what the definition of faith is. Yeah. Faith is being able to see the invisible, believe the incredible, and receive the impossible. In other words, how many times have you heard people say, oh, that's impossible, God can't do that? Ask someone, do you think God understands nuclear energy? Do you think he could navigate the internet? Are you kidding? He's an old man up there in the sky somewhere. He's old. He doesn't know how to do this stuff. Okay. Yeah. If it doesn't have thou shalt not do specific whatever, it's okay. So going back to chapter 11, by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God. Obviously, we were not there. How fantastic is that? Would it be possible for man? No. So that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. What does that tell us about the creation? There are many scientists that say what about the creation? Oh, well, there were particles of dust out there all over the universe, and over millions of years, those all came together and formed the planets. And then we had this ooze that eventually developed, and out of that ooze came a cell. And that cell began to multiply. Well, anyway, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. But this says that the world, everything was made what? Out of things which are not seen. However God made it, we could not have seen it. Whatever he made it from, I believe he made it exist out of nothing. Now, verse 4, by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Number one, it says by faith, what? Abel did something. He didn't sit around in his, oh, I feel so good. I'm just, letting God do whatever. And I remember in high school, there was a girl, at the end of the summer, we were discussing something, and she says, I didn't get a job this summer. I just didn't feel like it, and I felt like God was telling me I shouldn't work. So, by faith, Abel what? Did something. He offered a better sacrifice than Cain. We won't go into what it was, but anyway, verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For he obtained the witness that before he is being taken up, he was what? Pleasing to God. How was he pleasing? What did he do? Go ahead. Obviously, he had to have done something. He not only had to not do what he shouldn't, but he also had to do something that would please God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Now, we discussed how that meritorious works expect what? Reward, compensation, whatever. That word is used here for works of faith. So do we have a contradiction? Well, none of these perform these acts of faith saying, okay, God, you owe me. I've earned it. Instead, they did what God told them to. This next one, by faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen. Faith is seeing that which is incredible and impossible. We understand that, of course, before Noah built the ark, what was absent? Rain. What kind of faith would it take to, we believe it took him 100 years to build the ark. What kind of faith would it take to last 100 years building this ship Not a boat, a ship, to save all the animals and stuff. Yeah, probably was ridiculed for it. Yeah. So, we're about out of time. But do you understand? And to cap it off, what motivates us to work, to do acts of faith, not expecting meritorious credits? One more place, Luke 17. As is already stated, for one thing, the things that we do as Christians, according to our faith, are things we do because not what we have done to merit it, but what God has already done, what Jesus has already done. While we were yet sinners, what? Christ died for the ungodly. Before we were even born, God prepared a way of salvation for us. Luke 17. Let me see. Verse 5. It says, the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, if you had faith like a mustard seed, you would say to him, to the mulberry tree, be uprooted and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. But which of you having a slave, now listen, beginning at verse 7, having a slave plowing or tending sheep will say to him when he has come in from the field, come immediately and sit down and eat. Is that what a slave was supposed to do in this time? No. In other words, he's saying, what master out there tells his slave, oh, you've been working so hard, you've been sweating, you just really need to take it easy. Come on in and eat. Is that what he does? But will he not say to him, prepare something for me to eat and properly clothe yourself and serve me until I've eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? He does not thank the slave because he did the things which were commanded, does he? In other words, the master didn't reward him for doing what? His job, doing what he was supposed to do. So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded you, say, we are unworthy slaves. We have done only that which we ought to have done. It is part of our nature. It is who we are. Just like James says, we show our faith by our works. We show our identity by what we do. Not expecting return. Not expecting to be rewarded. In closing, there was a preacher who was on his deathbed in the hospital. And as he was laying there reflecting on things, a fellow preacher comes in and says, brother, you are about to receive your reward. Sounds good, doesn't it? The man on his deathbed, the preacher on his deathbed, looks at him and says, no, now I'm about to receive mercy. Questions? Comments? Thank you for your attendance, and thank you for participation, and we'll look forward to next week.